Hi everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion about data fabric, data mesh, and other trends in data management. I'm joined here by four really great panelists, Rick, Antti, Henrik, and Kenneth. Please, gentlemen, introduce yourselves, beginning with Rick.
Yeah, hi, my name is Rick Mutsaers. I'm a principal architect at Informatica, and as you know, Informatica is a leading data integration company. So we have to deal with the various architectures that organizations create to manage their data and to expose data, and that's why I think it's a really interesting topic to talk about data fabrics, data meshes, and other trends that we see in the world of data management.
Excellent.
So thanks for inviting me.
How about you, Antti?
Hey, so my name is Antti Loukiala. I'm a tech lead at Solita. We as a Solita, we work with some of the larger Nordic companies developing data platforms and data-related applications and such. And of course, data mesh is a huge thing. We have been kind of moving towards that even before the data mesh in the distributed approaches. But of course, now that the word has been coined, we are really looking into it and have been implementing sort of the beginning parts of data mesh at some of our customers.
Interesting. Henrik.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Henrik Nielsen. I've been working in 20 years in the data management industry. I've been working both at Oracle as an implementation consultant and a cloud enterprise architect. And I've now been with Snowflake for 2.5 years as a principal sales engineer, where I'm supporting the strategic customers in the Nordics and the rest of Europe to get the most value out of Snowflake. Snowflake, as you may know, is a cloud data platform. So we're cloud native. And the technology behind Snowflake is actually something that is, giving the possibility of doing, like Antti said, the distributed nature of data, and actually putting that together in a place where you can leverage the data mesh concept as well. I've been working with concepts similar to the data mesh for the past 20 years, going from data virtualization over to data federation. And there have been many names around it, but I'm looking forward to the discussion here to see what sets the data mesh apart.
Excellent. And Kenneth.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Kenneth Dalvik. I am data and analytics architect at SAP. I come from the business side, and I started as a controller. So I started at the time when you were actually producing BI reports manually by copying into paper folders and so on. I've been in the IT industry since 2005 in various roles. I've been a developer, solution architect, project manager, and so on. And now I'm at SAP working with the business technology platform where the analytics and data warehousing and data management topics are. And I am writing a white paper on the data mesh concept. So I think this is a very interesting topic that I personally are very interested in the soft side of data management more than perhaps the technology. So thank you for inviting me. It's
excellent.
Privilege.
Well, Antti, you said, or used the expression that the word data mesh and perhaps even data fabric have been coined quite recently. I think I heard it for the first time only a handful of years ago at the most. And I think all four of you mentioned that you've been working with concepts similar to the data mesh. I would like to hear from all of you how the data mesh as an architectural principle differs from what we've been doing in the past. Not in terms of outcome, but a little bit in terms of approach to managing data. What about you, Rick? How do you think data fabric and data mesh are different from what we've been doing in the past?
Well, as you know, there's been a trend towards more self-service, more control within the different business units to handle their own data, as opposed to a trend of centralizing and building enterprise data warehouses in the 90s and early 2000s. We all saw that there were big challenges when you build an enterprise data warehouse. So managing that was difficult. And then we see this technology trend shift from the traditional Oracle reports and what have you, BI systems, through the Hadoop ecosystem that went and gone, is gone again, all the way into the cloud ecosystems. So that puts an enormous strain on IT organizations to manage even the technology, let alone servicing their business users. So that drives a need for the business to take matters in their own hands. If you do that uncontrolled, then everybody builds their own little empire, and it's difficult to manage and govern. So the data mesh, where you have this balance between you put control in the hands of the business user, yet you also have some governance and you have some standards that you offer that they can use. It's I think a really great balance, and that's why I think a concept like the data mesh or a data fabric, depends on how you want to name it, is a very interesting trend that we see in the market.
Antti, I'm curious if you think that the data mesh is something that's driven from being a superior architecture, perhaps in that it has less governance requirements or less mistakes and that kind of thing, or if it's driven more from business needs.
I would say it's driven more from the business needs, and I think the really crucial thing here is that as companies are more and more dealing with data, data has become sort of all of the companies are looking into utilizing data more. A lot of the large companies, especially, have an issue with scaling. How do you scale the data development? And I think that is the key that data mesh is approaching. So it's about scaling your data development. So if you think about, if we go into the field of software development for a second, because a lot of these concepts that data mesh has come from there. In a software development, a monolith is a good way to start, and it actually serves a purpose when you are dealing with a fairly simple or controlled environment. You have a fairly small case, but when you look into scale the development, where you have multiple teams working on these data issues, you need an architecture pattern, you need a organizational structure to support that, and that's where the data mesh comes in. And I think there's a lot of fantastic things that happen on the side of this that we will probably dig deeper into in the future. But I think I wouldn't say it's a superior architecture, but I think when it's needed, when scalability is really needed, this gives you a frame to start developing on it.
What would you say, Henrik, what would you say to people that feel maybe this is basically just self-service BI with a new cool name? Is there something more to data fabric and data mesh?
I think that the data mesh concept, of course, the end goal is self-service BI, but I think it's more around the how you structure an organization around data. Self-service is just a byproduct of it, because the whole concept of the data mesh is it's really having the business domains taking ownership of the data, which has been difficult until now because of the technical limitations, whatever. But the real thing that the data mesh brings to the table, in my perspective, is this that it's an organizational structure as well. I would say it's 90% organization. How do you structure your business around data, and 10% technology, because it's not really a technology question. So where it's different from what you're saying, self-service BI is it's this concept of data as a product. I think that is very interesting around data mesh. That you define some, it's a bit similar to what we've had with microservices and SOA set up. All these APIs and whatever you want to call it. That you have these very well-defined interfaces of data. So the data needs to be addressable, interoperable, well described or self-describing, and it needs to be secure most of all. And that is one of the things that have been an issue until now, having a very secure way of working with data in a distributed manner.
Right, I understand. And so I guess the question is, what kind of technical support is required to sort of assist organizations in making these kinds of changes? Kenneth, SAP is a kind of product that is business critical for one, but where, it would be interesting to hear from you how SAP perhaps has given new tools to assist in these types of organizational changes to achieve a data fabric or data mesh approach to data management?
Yeah.
Like what's different?
Yeah, I mean, sorry?
Yeah. What's different? What's new?
Yeah, what's new? First of all, I think a lot of people have a perception of SAP being in this big closed down, not open ERP vendor and all of that. I mean, I represent the SAP Business Technology Platform. We have it's kind of a new SAP. It's very open. It's hyperscaler agnostic, for example. There's good support for agility and self-service. So we have those kind of words top of mind in our new products. So I think we have SAP have a good coverage for supporting data mesh. We might use some different names of some of the capabilities, but overall, I think with the self-serving data platform, with the federation, with the virtualization, the business technology platform and SAP's offering are good. We are open in both ends, if I say like that. I think that's a key message from us.
Do customers come to you with data fabric and data mesh as sort of key words that they're asking for?
Yeah, it has come the last 1.5 years, and that's also coming as input into the development of the new cloud-based products. So yes, it has come as requirements in RFPs. It has come to us. How do you see data mesh? Do you have good support for it? So we're formalizing here this answer into white papers and blogs and similar, also impacting the way we develop our tools. But we have a parallel to the data mesh. Have had self-service modeling, self-service pipelining, self-service analytics into the product since many years now. And openness has been since HANA came into the picture, the technology platform. So, we're following this closely, and it's surely impacting the way our products are today and how they are being developed.
Right. Well, SAP certainly is a collection of ideas brought together, as well as Informatica is. And I guess one question that audience members are asking is, what's the difference between a data mesh in the way you guys perceive it, coming from your product perspective, and say, developers internal to a company simply exposing data through well-designed APIs or SOA services? Rick, what would you say?
Well, exposing data via APIs and services is typically meant to provide business functions to anyone who needs that business function in the organization. For instance, I want to produce an invoice, so I need to send some input to an API, and the response is the invoice is created, and the result is that somewhere in a system an invoice is being created. So that's how you tie together business processes by defining the APIs and the interfaces and the services behind those. If you look at the data mesh, it's much more around how do we expose the data for business analytics, for all kinds of purposes, and how do we ensure that the responsibility for that exposure of data, building these data products, lies within the different teams, the different business units, and not so much in a centralized organization. So I think that's the key difference. Data mesh focuses on producing data, and SOAs and APIs, etc., more focus on exchanging data in the context of business processes. At least that's how I.
Is there an overlap? I mean, are they mutually exclusive, or how do they relate?
Well, there is some overlap, but again, APIs and stores are typically meant for business processes, to build business processes so they operate efficiently, and a data mesh is more around, hey, we need access to this data so that we can do business analytics, reporting, predictions, etc., etc.
Right.
So they serve different purposes.
I actually see it as the data mesh is actually incorporates also this kind of business functions and business logic, right? That you can also see that as part of the data mesh, because in the end, it's whether it's operational data or it's analytical data, it's still data, right? So I do see that there's room for API services and SOA services within the data mesh as well as part of it.
Right, but then does that mean that you would want to sort of segment these functionalities so that maybe APIs only you treat them like functions rather than data producers? Although the output of a function is data, so it's not entirely clear to me why you would distinguish a business function from a user function or something. How should governments, how should companies make that choice? I mean, what to implement as an API and what to expose as part of the data mesh?
I think, Robert, you have a really good point there that if we think about an API is basically exposing information that the application holds. It's not exposing data. We don't want to expose data. We want to decouple the application from the information it exposes. And that's where we have APIs. And what I see the data as a product doing is exactly the same thing, but the field of data. So we want to decouple the information that the application holds from the actual usage of it. And I have we ran into this case where we actually there was a team exposing raw data from the source system for others to use, which kind of, okay, data mesh, you own your data, you expose it and so on. But what happened was that the users actually got tied to the source system. So so basically the coupling of the source system went all the way to the users of the data. And now if you would have to change that source system, the users would be kind of screwed,
right.
And everything would break. So therefore, I think that it's really like thinking about an API. Well, API is a generic term, but nowadays it's usually referred to as a RESTful API or such, which is more for operational usage. But what we're missing is a data interface. And this data as a product creates that initial sort of launch for search of a data interface, so a technology agnostic interface to a data. And how does it differ from an API? If we think that both of these are actually exposing information that the application holds, it's that the data as a product, the data interface is exposing the wide set to the data, whereas an API or RESTful API is exposing that one specific API. And we actually have done something like this at Solita in one project. It was kind of fantastic to see. We had developers building an API for operational usage, but kind of on the side, just for the future cases for the data people, they're going to come ask for data anyways. So the developers actually exposed the exactly same data as the API exposes, but from an S3 bucket. This was in AWS, from an S3 bucket as JSONs. So now all of a sudden the S3 is exposing the sort of wide access to the data, or if I call it a data interface, yet the API was exposing the operational side of the things. And if you imagine what this creates is now all of a sudden you have the exactly same data available in the wide axis, but also in a specific axis. And I would imagine that you start building machine learning models and such on this, you can actually utilize the both. So they're coming very, very close together. And I think this is what's kind of happening in the field, that we're converging. The development side of things, the software development and data development are converging closer and closer together. And it's a fantastic thing.
Now, I think to make sorry to interrupt, but I think that's a great point. So the point I made was that APIs are used for operational purposes and business purposes, but APIs are just one interface to expose data. Typically behind an API, there's like all kinds of business logic that's being executed, but I think the point is it's just one of the ways to expose data. Another way is a file. Another way is a report in a BI system. Another way is a bucket in S3, like Antti mentioned. So there's a variety of ways of exposing data, or building data products. Data products can be anything, can be a lot of things, and an API exposing that information is just one example of how to expose data, how to build a data product.
I have a comment here, Kenneth, just quickly. I mean, I think it's also, to me, the data mesh takes it way further. I mean, I really like the organizational aspects of it. I mean, it can impact the whole organization. To me, it's like top management decision to go for this. It will impact the job roles, the KPIs people are measured by, perhaps your bonus, you know. That the soft aspect is why I'm so interested in it, to be honest, personally. I think that's a big difference then between having a well prepared and managed API and SOA service. So the whole thing, the whole concept of data mesh is really interesting.
I think HANA, a lot of people, when they think of it, they can see it both as a transactional platform and as an analytical platform. Do organizations tend to go for one or the other, or do they simply hope to achieve everything in one place, expose data, expose it through various means, files, APIs, and also do analytics there? And the reason I'm asking is because yesterday when we were talking about master data management and, you know, feature stores and that kind of thing, you don't necessarily want to have layers that are unmanaged, precisely for the reason that we just mentioned now, that you want to decouple the raw data and what's exposed so that you can do, you know, version control and all that kind of thing. I mean, is it a good architectural pattern to have everything in one place, or how do you tend to design these platforms when something like HANA can be used for many things?
Yeah, I mean, we recommend to have, you know, decoupled as well. So we normally speak about embedded analytics or operational BI coming back to the picture for those cases where it's important, like in the financial closing process. But if you want to establish like a data mesh architecture and separate it to, I mean, data platform, you can have both in parallel, so to speak. All our applications have HANA as a database nowadays, so you can, and most of our customers do, embedded, we call it embedded analytics, but you can also call it operational BI for when it fits. But then there are reasons for and we recommend when to have a data platform for analytical use cases, for data scientist use cases, you know, potentially going for a data mesh architecture that would, I would say, go more towards the platform thinking.
Yeah. I think we should do another round of this because many of the needs of transactional systems and of analytical systems sort of mirror conceptually what you would want from operational interfaces and maybe reporting interfaces and maybe something else. Rick, from Informatica's perspective, I mean, things like feature stores, for example, you know, we presume that there's infinite computational power and that we can simply expose these abstract data layers up to users, but they are fairly computationally intense. From an architecture design perspective, how should people be thinking of data mesh and data fabric? Is it should they be having their, you know, Spark cluster on one side to do, you know, heavy lifting, and another system maybe to expose transactionally intensive operational APIs, and then the data mesh is just the data layer, or like how do you approach that?
That's an interesting question. First of all, I think the need for a data mesh is coming from the business in need of I need data. I need control over my data. So it's not something to do with technology per se. the fact that we now have technology that will support distributed architectures, where you have unlimited distributed processing power to do that computational stuff that you mentioned. It's the fact that cloud ecosystems provide that all of that in a very controlled fashion. So that makes it possible. But the reason why concepts like data mesh are appearing is that business is fed up with going to a central team that builds a data product for them, and they have to wait for months for that team to build that data product. They want to do that themselves. And by doing that themselves, they have control of what they build, and whoever wants to use that data, that's fine. But we wanted to build this because our own group of users has a business need to do that. And the computational power that's needed, well, that's just the technology implementation. And there are many ways to implement the data mesh technology wise. You need storage systems that can store local data. Well, HANA is a great example. HANA can store operational data, but it can also store analytical data. It's just data, and the interface of how you exchange that data is what's important. So what I'm trying to say is, well, yes, we have all the computational power nowadays with cloud ecosystems being available. So it's really about why is a data mesh architecture relevant? It's because people want to have their own control over data. And how is it different from that monolithic architecture? Well, in a monolithic architecture, there's a central team that defines who can access what part of data. And that just simply doesn't work anymore in this day and age.
But I have a comment here. I mean, is it the overall goal of actually realizing the value out of the data? That's where the challenge has been, that people have or organizations haven't really got the value back from their big data initiatives, and why that is probably because of the central platform and the bottlenecks and so on. But at the end of the day, business have invested a lot of money but aren't really getting the value, and it's been difficult to measure the value, and the kind of old setup has been a bottleneck, repeating the word here, but it's been a bottleneck to why not the value has been realized.
A bottleneck to creativity from the users that don't have access to the right things?
A bottleneck to creativity, a bottleneck to for the business domains to achieve their goals around data. Because I guess they have goals of data value realization. Yeah.
I'd like to dwell on this question a little, on the technology a little bit more, even though I know that data fabric and data mesh are more approaches, even if we don't want to call them architectural approaches, if they're organizational approaches. But Antti, one of the things is, if you're going to be implementing governance protocols and systems, and you want to implement access controls to the various data, and you want to have the technology supporting this sort of democratization of data. If you have more than one platform like HANA, if you have something like 5 or 6 different systems, and you have to be managing the cloud platforms' support for this kind of access, and maybe your analytical databases support for this practice, and maybe the reporting and the computation, all that kind of thing. Does it make sense does it make sense to consider how monolithic or non-monolithic this setup is? And then are we not back to square one, where, for the sake of simplicity, you have one monolithic system and one team perhaps even that is managing all this? Like, how do you approach it?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think there is sort of certain elements that you can see from the start that should be managed centrally. And if you think about, for example, authentication, that's usually managed centrally. It makes sense that you have one place what does it. But I think it's a different thing to actually do the job than to host the technology. And that's kind of where the key is, that if you want to have, if you see that many teams are, for example, doing machine learning and they're using similar tools, then maybe there should be a team providing that tool for very easy access that has connections to the data sets and can go from there. Or if they're using a storage, so maybe someone would actually have, it would make sense to manage the storage and then distribute it out, those things. So I think one example that I use is Kafka. I mean, Kafka can be a handful to manage. So you have one team in the Kafka dedicating topics to each one of these teams that needs it. So the teams don't actually have to manage the Kafka themselves, but they can start utilizing it. But that doesn't mean that the team that's hosting the Kafka would be actually putting data into Kafka. It's just that they dedicate the topics and so on.
Right,
so
but would that team be distributed, or would it be sort of a central team?
No, I would imagine that would be a central team, because that makes the most sense. So managing the Kafka would be a central team, but it would be so that the topics would be distributed out, so anyone can start utilizing that.
Right.
So I think we actually have a podcast episode on the data by the slice coming up, and I'm going to give you a sneak peek on it because it's not out yet. But we had a chat with Marko Taipale, and he had a very good point. He was working in a company where they were developing different kind of applications. What they didn't do is they didn't start with the platform. They started with the applications. And when they actually realized that many of these applications are utilizing this, same technology, they then they turned those into platform and started to build platform out of them. Okay. So sort of realizing which technology is something that most people are using, utilizing that to build that into a platform, and then helping these teams to actually use that technology. And what's really cool about this is that if you imagine now different teams are working on their use case, they're not dictated to use single technology, but they can actually innovate, search for new technology, start utilizing that. And if there's multiple teams using that, maybe then it makes sense to form a team that takes hold of that technology and then start distributing it out to these teams. So it actually gives a way to innovate at the same time, but also when you choose the route that has been chosen or many have chosen, you get a lot of support. So you have a way to go forward with support, but you're also allowed to innovate.
Right, there are economies of scale here. I think that makes me think of one thing, Henrik and Snowflake. The product is very amenable to allowing teams to manage their own usage of the platform and that kind of thing. Could you share any sort of best practices or pitfalls when it comes to how much responsibility to place on teams versus central organizations? The example we got here from Antti is still that maybe it would be a central team of experts managing the Kafka topics, whereas users could do a certain amount. So where do you draw that line of how much responsibility to place out in the organization versus more centrally?
I think that's a good question. It very much depends on the maturity of the organization on a technical level, but also on working with data. I think we see in our customer base, we see a mix of those. We see customers that are very tech savvy, who actually have built. We have a company in the Netherlands who have built a data mesh setup where they are doing. They're ingesting the operational data in a central Snowflake account, and then they're sharing that with the business domains accounts. So each business domain has its own Snowflake account, but you can use data sharing between the accounts. And that makes it very easy because the data sharing is also like an interface where you define what data is coming out. So, but at the same time, they have some domain-specific data that they can bring into their Snowflake account and mix this up, and then curate it and expose that to the rest of the business through a thing called the data exchange that actually, is a documented way of sharing data back to the organization. And you don't need to use a Snowflake account to access this data because it's an open, it's an open interface. You can use JDBC, ODBC, or whatever BI or ETL tool that you want to work with that. But that's on the technology side. We also have customers who only have theirs like really central data warehouse, because that is the way that they have been used to operating, and they're not ready to move forward. And I think it was, I can't remember who it was that said that it really starts at the top, right? It's like a top organizational thing that you need to start there. You need to have C-level backup, somebody having your back around this and giving you the mandates to implement this in the organization. But the organization needs to have the need for it as well.
Right. Kenneth, I'm thinking from SAP's perspective, these past few days, we've been talking about educating organizations on AI. And I've been saying that organizations don't necessarily need to know how to program AI, but it is important to be able to know how things work in principle. And I guess here, what we're hearing from everyone is that there is a kind of data education element of it as well. Are there any similar anecdotes that you have in terms of data maturity and what that allows or doesn't allow organizations to do when it comes to how distributed or not to have this kind of data mesh responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not suited to answer for the whole of SAP and so on, so I can just answer on my own experience. But I agree with Henrik here. It's very much down to the organization and the skill set, and I have thought a little bit about this. I think it's a little bit it's stupid to say average age, but I think the workforce is important. I mean, if there is an organization with young people, they are often IT savvy. Most of them have their own SQL tool, the favorite SQL tool. They know how to program, even if they're coming from an economics background. So I think those are key aspects. From SAP point of view, I mean, we have built our new cloud products with self-service in mind and way beyond BI. So self-service pipelining, self-service modeling, but also self-service AI. So we have this kind of, not promoting too much, but you don't have to be a data scientist to create and train and apply a predictive model, for example,
right?
And how to apply it in a real life process like planning and so on. So I mean, we have that top of mind in the new cloud products, and
I like your example of the
at the same time also exposing coding should you like to, or bring your own favorite tool.
Well, the cool thing, one example I like that you gave was the economists that know how to program but probably don't consider themselves as programmers first and foremost. I think that the mere knowledge of what's possible, either through programming or through AI and other stuff, is sufficient to really enable these kinds of techs. One question we did get from the audience, though, that would be interesting to hear from all four of you, given that you do have pretty unique perspectives here, are what kinds of data are not suited for a data mesh architecture? Rick, what would you say? What comes top of mind?
That's a good. It's a good question. I would say data mesh is about exposing data products. Right? You're building data products that are usable for your own group and for others. So raw data typically is less suitable for a typical data mesh, but it's the input that you need to build a data product. So I don't think there is a lot of data that's unsuitable for data meshes. If anything, I would say the operational data messages that go back and forth between applications, that may not be the type of data that you want to use in a data mesh architecture. Although at some point you need to work this data up to a level that you say, hey, now it's becoming usable information or data, so that I can derive information from it. So, but operational data, typically, a data mesh is typically you expose data for typically informational purposes, the analytics type purposes. So that's typically data that's been aggregated, that's been cleansed, that's been transformed into a format so that it's usable and readable and understandable by everyone. So and the raw data typically is something that's you don't expose raw data per se. So.
Right. Antti, what do you think? I mean, the one thing that comes to mind to me is if there's any kind of sensitive data. Is that something that, I don't know, maybe financial reporting data or something like that. But even there, if there's some large part of the organization that needs to handle it, does it make sense to put that kind of stuff in the data mesh as well? What's your take on it?
No, that's a good point, and I was actually thinking about that. That it's kind of interesting that we want to democratize the data in the companies. We want to make it available for as many as possible. But then comes in the PII data, and all of a sudden, you can't expose it out just as it is, and you have to hide it. So I think there's sort of two approaches which we have taken in our project. Is that one is that we hide the PII data. So every time when you expose the data, if it's not absolutely must, if the meaning of the data disappears without the PII data, then we have to do something else. But the idea is that it will be free to use to almost anyone. If you can release that kind of data sets, then you're actually democratizing data, because it's really easy to discover the data and start using it. If the PII data has to be there, then expose the metadata, expose the information about what the data is about. And even to that level that just tell that this kind of data exists. This is a person who you can contact to get working with it. Because it's really interesting to see that we're seeing when we are exposing these different data sets, data products, we're seeing new connections that we never predicted before. So it's all of a sudden you see these kind of, it's like a grass, and you see these fields, people are walking all over it in places that you never imagined that would happen. So exposing the data, I think exposing the metadata is crucial. PII data, it's really tricky, but if you can hide it away from the data, you can actually democratize the data. Right.
Henrik, what do you say? I'm thinking also about, there's a lot of data, when you make it accessible, it becomes sensitive, even though it's not PII data. For instance, sales data, which might be super useful for sellers, but maybe can affect stock market outcomes and that kind of thing. What kind of data is appropriate and not appropriate to do in the data mesh?
Actually, before answering your question, it's just a very interesting point that I see coming up here. So Rick is talking about, the raw to curated data, right? That's one way of looking at a kind of or a type of data. Then we're talking about sensitive or not sensitive, right? Is that PII? Is it, as you say, is it confidential data within an organization? And then we have the concept of also operational versus analytical data, which kind of puts into the raw to curated. But I think if you have the right governance in place, and that's the really difficult thing about the data mesh, and that's because that's what we're getting at here. It's how do you secure data? How do you, and Antti pointed to it as well, right? How do you limit the access to the data? Not necessarily, just blocking access, but masking it, hiding it, right? Mm-hmm. And this is where there's actually, I would like to, again, not to toot my own horn, but I would actually like to point you to we're just having this summit in the week that we're recording this, at Snowflake, where we actually have one of our security architects demonstrating how this is possible. How can you share data and at the same time mask the data in Snowflake, which makes it very suitable for using as your foundation for a data mesh. I mean, we're always going to have regulatory data that needs to be shared with the authorities. That is also something that you need to, of course, make sure that it's only those authorities that you get. And it all comes from having a secure way of handling your data. And not just blocking access for everyone, right? Because even sales data can be interesting within Snowflake. Our product team are actually looking at sales data, even though they don't necessarily have a need for it, but they actually do, because they can understand how are our customers looking, what questions are they asking, what features are they requesting when they are talking to us, right? And they are analyzing this data.
Perhaps not the size of the deals and that kind of thing.
Exactly, they cannot see the size of the deal. They can see buckets, right? Is this a large, small, or medium deal, right? And then they understand for prioritization, of course. That's part of the prioritization process, is how big a customer is, and we're talking about here.
Exactly.
And I think there's really one interesting thing about this as well, that if we think about the domain-oriented approach to this, what I find interesting is that when I talk to these different teams that are actually building their data products, they are the best ones to know about PII data. So at times I run into these fields and I don't know that it is PII data, but it is the domain that knows whether it is sensitive or not, and how to encrypt it, and what is the right level to do it. And it's also that the data product should be exposing information and not data. So a lot of times the data is really cryptic even, and you need the domain expertise to perform that higher level. And then it might be that all the sensitive data is not needed anymore.
Kenneth, I'm going to have to give you the last word here. We've been chatting for 45 minutes. For companies that want to start a data mesh journey, what is an ideal data source to start this discussion with?
Ideal data source.
Or ideal kind of data to start the data mesh transformation with.
Okay. Well, then I think if you have an SAP S/4HANA system, it's good. We have curated the data. We have this kind of analytical views already prepared. There are metadata around it. So you will get a lot of things for free when you're setting up data as a product. If you take some of the entities from SAP S/4HANA, could take the master data or the financial.
All right. Any data in the database.
Data is already. Sorry.
Any data in the database.
No, not any data, but I think we have a lot of things prepared for you that will simplify the implementation of a data mesh by using the industry knowledge that we have put into, for example, analytical views that are already curated for you.
Right, that's good to know, and that there are best practices built in there.
Yeah, it is. So,
well, gentlemen,
that could be a good start.
We've been speaking for 45 minutes. I can't believe it. This one actually went very fast. It's been super great talking with you, and to the audience, thanks for joining us today. We will be seeing you at the next session, and thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for having us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.